All right, I'm also joined today by my colleague Heather Hocrine, and together we will provide you with information about this exciting grant opportunity. So just a little bit of housekeeping as we get started. Everyone at the bottom of the screen should see various options, including ask a question. So if you have questions throughout the presentation, please drop them there, and we will have a Q&A session at the end. We also will have a few poll questions throughout the presentation, and I'm going to go ahead and launch the first poll question. So it will pop up there in a moment. If you could please respond to it. It is, what is your relationship to the property where these chargers through the grant would be installed? So I'll give you a few seconds to respond. While people are filling that out, I will note that there is a chat function as well. So if you want to have a conversation, feel free to do so. But I encourage you to ask questions in the Ask a Question portal. All right, looks like about a third of people have answered the poll question. Again, if you're looking for the poll question, it's there at the bottom. Just click polls and it'll pop up. Give everyone another 15 seconds. All right, great. So it looks like we have quite a few tenants and residents, which makes sense. You folks are probably interested in adding chargers at your properties, so hopefully we can help enable that. It doesn't look like we have any owners or property managers. They are the ones that we also need to speak with and who need to actually apply for the grants. So if you are a tenant or a resident, you'll want to pass on any information you learn here to your owner or property manager. And that looks like we have a few other folks as well. All right. So here's what we will cover today. We'll do some introductions for the two speakers, myself and Heather. We'll talk a little bit more about the problem, specifically of EV charging at apartments and condos. Then Heather will discuss the California Energy Commission grant, and we'll have a Q&A session there at the end. So hi everyone, my name is William Truesdell. I'm the Sales and Marketing Manager here at EVmatch, and I'm excited to be the main point of contact for the CEC grant program and help distribute these so that there's more charging accessibility at multifamily properties in California. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Heather for an introduction.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you today. My name is Heather Hocrine, and I'm the founder and CEO of EVmatch. And I started EVmatch in 2016 as an innovative solution to address the growing need for EV charging. And I bring expertise in clean energy, energy efficiency, transportation electrification, and climate policy. And as William mentioned, we are thrilled to be here today with you sharing more info about this California Energy Commission grant and ways to increase access to charging throughout the state of California. I previously was in the utility and energy efficiency sectors and have done a lot of work in workforce development as well in the Bay Area. So looking forward to working with all of you further. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. All right, so to kick off the presentation, I want to start with a quick stat that 1 in 10 drivers in California have an electric car, and that number is expected to increase exponentially. So this is an important problem to solve for multifamily properties. More EV models are being released every year, and that will also increase the number of EV drivers on the road. But as many of you know, there is a problem. There aren't enough charging stations to keep up with this high demand. Today, most EV drivers do have the luxury of home charging, so they can easily resolve this low battery warning simply by plugging in at home. In fact, more than 80% of all EV charging does happen at home. You know, it doesn't get any easier than pulling into your driveway, plugging in, charging up overnight, and heading off the next day fully charged. You don't even have to go to a gas station. But what if you live in one of these? More than 40% of Americans rent or live in a multifamily property, whether it's an apartment, a condo, a fourplex, etc. The vast majority of these buildings are not equipped with charging infrastructure yet. So that's something that we're working to resolve with both our charging solution and this grant. So while this charging problem is pretty large now, it's also a massive opportunity for property owners and property managers at multifamily properties or other commercial locations. EV charging at your property can help you stay ahead of the competition, you know, and win over those high value tenants like Tesla drivers who are really demanding EV charging where they live. This is also an opportunity to be part of a solution by helping more people drive electric, and it provides a passive way to earn revenue, or just simply attract tenants with a low cost amenity if you wanted to even cover the cost of electricity yourself and not require drivers to pay. So our solution enables both of those opportunities. All right, so EVmatch is the charging solution for multifamily properties, and I'm going to show you what it looks like.
40 million Americans are considering an electric vehicle for their next car, and a quarter of them live in multifamily housing without charging stations. Fortunately, EVmatch has the charging solution for your multifamily building that is 30 to 60% lower cost than other options. Our advanced software allows drivers to easily reserve and pay for charging sessions, so stations are efficiently shared, while you earn a profit. You can control availability and price, all while monitoring your stations with our easy-to-use app. Learn more about our multifamily charging solution by visiting our website. Don't wait. Contact our sales team now. 40 million Americans are considering an electric vehicle for their next car.
Sorry about that. So that was a quick overview of the EVmatch charging solution for multifamily properties, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail before we jump into the details about the grant program. So at EVmatch, we're a leading seller at multifamily properties for a couple of reasons. We're the most affordable charging solution. We work with very affordable Wi-Fi enabled charging stations that allow you to monetize chargers and offer access control. We have a reservation system, so EV drivers can efficiently share chargers, make reservations, and there's no sort of struggling to move vehicles and figure out if there's a space available. And finally, we provide payments, so secure payment processing allows property owners or managers to recoup electricity costs and also generate a new revenue stream. EVmatch also enables multifamily hosts to customize their charging management experience. So what that looks like is hosts can create different groups so they can differentiate how different drivers use the charging stations. For example, they could provide 24/7 access to their tenants or residents at the cost of electricity or a little bit above that. And then they can create a public group which provides access to the general public at maybe a higher rate to earn extra revenue. Our platform handles all those logistics, so users can see that they have access to a specific charger and always get the best price based on the group that they've been designated to. So whether it's tenants, general public, ownership, etc. The EVmatch grouping feature leverages both access codes and idle fees, so the stations can be efficiently shared among multiple EV drivers. All right, so now that you have a sense of how our software works, we can get into the details of the CEC grant. But before we do that, I have 2 more poll questions. So I'm going to launch those. It looks like some folks may have already answered them, but I'm going to relaunch them. So I'll give you a few seconds. The first question is, do you currently have EV drivers who reside at the property? And the second question is, if you do have EV drivers, how many? All right, so it looks like 4 to 3. There are, well, I guess it's 4 people, yes. 5 people, yes, there are EV drivers at the property. 3, they don't know. And then properties have anywhere from 0 to 9 EV drivers. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Heather to give more details about the CC grant.
Thank you, William. All right, so I'm excited to launch into the details about this grant award. So EVmatch was awarded an $800,000 grant from the California Energy Commission this year. And we are really thrilled about this award because it's enabling us to increase access to EV chargers in general to a customer segment that we know has historically been underserved and underinvested in. And what we're really motivated to do is not only provide access to renters and apartment dwellers who live in these buildings that are selected for the grants, but also bring that access to the general public. So folks in other buildings in the surrounding communities, and make those chargers available on a reservation basis. So specifically, the award funds will go to deploying 120 level 2 charging stations in specific counties in California. And I'll tell you more about those specific locations. And we will leverage our reservation software to ensure that the charging stations are shared efficiently among the tenants, but also available to the public at some hours of the day. So that ensures that there'll be high utilization on the chargers, and we'll really be leveraging this funding from the state to increase access to even more people than just the 120 chargers, the residents who live in those buildings where we deploy the chargers. Next slide, William. So specifically, the grant is funding multifamily property EV charging station deployments in Los Angeles County, San Diego County, and Santa Clara counties. And I want to make sure it's clear this is the county. So, the whole county for all 3 of those areas. Of course, we'll have a big focus on the main metro areas in Los Angeles and San Diego, but the county is eligible. We will be offering 4 to 6 level 2 charging stations per property. The charging stations themselves, or the equipment, is the NLX juice box, and we'll be offering either 32 amp or 40 amp charging stations. We'll also be providing mounting hardware, so pedestals if needed. The juice boxes can also be mounted on the wall. And then we'll have a variety of other components that go into creating a successful project. So we are offering 5 years of EVmatch management software at no cost to the site host. We're also including networking equipment and data plan coverage for 5 years. So this is in the event that a site host needs a cellular hotspot. We will be paying for that equipment and covering the cost of the data plan for 5 years. That said, the site host will be responsible for that data plan after 5 years. So if it is possible to use a local Wi-Fi network, that may be preferable for the site host to reduce long-term operating costs. We will also be providing $5,000 per station for installation costs. So this means electrical infrastructure upgrades, running conduit, wiring, trenching, really all of the work that needs to be done in order to bring the electrical to the parking stalls where the chargers will be installed, and ensuring safety and regulatory compliance. And then lastly, EVmatch will be paying for permit fees. So there is an electrical permit that's required for each of these installations with the municipality, and EVmatch will be covering those costs. In total, this is valued at over $46,000 per property. And as you can see, this is a really great opportunity for property owners who may have been hesitant thus far to invest in charging stations because they may have low demand currently, and you have a bit of that chicken or egg problem where people aren't buying chargers, or they're not buying cars because they don't have charging, and people aren't installing charging because the cars aren't there. So we're really working to address that problem. Next slide. So we do have a number of criteria in order to be eligible for the grants, and we do expect that the program will be oversubscribed. We'll be deploying the grants over the next year and a half. However, we have already started recruiting and we are getting property submissions. So we do encourage anybody who's interested in this limited opportunity to tell your property owner or manager or other folks who could benefit about the opportunity as soon as possible. So these are the key requirements for the project. One, the building must be designated as multifamily housing. So this means multiple residential units per property. The grants will be awarded really based on a set of criteria. So a number of EV drivers in the building, a number of parking stalls that can be assigned to EV charging, public access, and so forth. And we'll be allocating the number of chargers based on a set of criteria, with the maximum being 6 chargers per property. We expect that most properties will receive 4 to 6 chargers. The other really important criteria I want to stress is that these chargers must have public access at some hours of the day. And so what we are saying is that it's 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. as the general requirement, but we are giving preference to properties who are able to provide 24/7 access to the public. And this is a criteria that's a requirement of the state, the public access, but the prioritization of certain properties is something that EVmatch has control over. And so we need to get as much information as possible when the site owner or host submits their application. I also want to mention this other point about shared access. These chargers cannot be installed in a deeded parking stall that's only available to one resident, for example. So these need to be shared parking stalls, and they also need to be designated for EVs only. So they cannot be shared with gas vehicles and electric vehicles. Next slide. So then we also have set some price ceilings for the price of charging at these charging stations. And so it's a little bit higher in Los Angeles and San Diego counties. That's set at 28 cents per kilowatt hour as the ceiling. So this is the price that the property owner, or site host as we call them, will set for charging at the charging station. In Clara County, it's 25 cents per kilowatt hour. And this is inclusive of EVmatch transaction fees. The other requirement is allowing EVmatch's certified subcontractors to complete all of the installation work. So we do have pre-approved, pre-vetted contractors that are part of our state agreement, and we need to use those contractors in order to complete the installation work. And then lastly, the property owner needs to own and operate the charging stations for 5 years. I also want to make it clear, EVmatch is not owning the assets. So the site owner, or the property owner, will be owning the charging stations, maintaining them, and operating them long-term. Next slide. So how do you apply? Well, we are accepting applications already. There is a apply for CEC grant button on this webinar platform. It's a green button. So click on that. It'll take you to a Google form, which is relatively simple, but this does need to be completed for every property that wants to apply for the program. So if you're an asset manager or property manager and you have multiple buildings that you want to submit, you'll need to complete a specific form for each building. We are accepting applications on a rolling basis until all of the grants have been distributed, and our next review date is scheduled for October 15th. I know William mentioned this, but if you are a tenant or a resident of a multifamily property, you are not eligible to submit on behalf of the property owner. So we do need to have the owner or manager submit the application. But we are thrilled about all of the attendance here today, and we encourage you to share this information to whomever will be submitting the application. Next slide. All righty, so with that, we are going to open it up to questions. I hope this has been informative. There is a ask a question function at the bottom of the screen where you can type in a question. And I see that there's already a little bit of chatter in the chat. You can also type a question there. I'm going to pass it back to William, who will moderate our Q&A session going forward. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Heather. I did want to mention we also dropped in another form into the chat. So if you're not quite ready to fill out the application form, but you do want more information or you want to connect EVmatch staff with your property owner, your property manager, you can fill out that form that's linked there, the second link. Actually, that is not the right link, but I will drop it in here. So that second, the link that EVmatch just dropped in the chat, if you're not quite interested, if you're not sure you want to apply yet, but you want to learn more about it, go ahead and fill that out, and we'll get in touch with you. All right, great. So let's get into some of these questions. So the first one I see is, do the charging stations need to be totally available to the public? What if parking is located behind a gate? Do you want to answer that one, Heather?
Sure. Yeah, so the charging stations have to have some public access, meaning some hours of the day. And as you saw from our previous requirement, it was 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. The chargers need to be made available to the public. So that does mean if there's a gate, that the property owner needs to be willing to allow EVmatch to provide access, like a gate code or some sort of instructions that can be sent via the app to members of the general public so they can access the site. If that's absolutely not possible, then unfortunately the property will not be eligible for this particular grant. That said, EVmatch does a lot of support around other incentive programs throughout the state of California. We're very familiar with all the utility incentives as well as the Cali VIP program. So I still encourage folks to submit either a inquiry via just our general outreach form or an application, and we can help you to try and identify other resources for the building.
Great. All right, so next question, how difficult is it to complete the grant application? And if I'm not the right one to submit it, how do I go about finding someone? So I'm happy to answer this one. The grant application is fairly straightforward. There are, quite a few questions. Mostly they are straightforward, especially if you're the property owner or property manager and you understand the specific setup of the property. So the second part of your question, if you're not the property manager or property owner, how do you go about finding someone? So that, those are two titles of people who are perfect for submitting the application. Decision makers at your property, someone who has the power to make these sorts of capital improvements at your property. So a property manager, property owner, a landlord. If you're working with a condo association, it might be an HOA board, so a representative of the board. It also could be an asset manager if they're managing multiple properties. So a number of different people. If you have more questions about that, our emails are going to be on the last slide. I wish I might just jump over to that slide so you can see it. Shoot us some emails if you have questions, but we do require that it's a decision maker, someone who has the power to make these sorts of upgrades at a property to submit the application. All right, great. Next question. So someone asks, we have a driveway with the ability to put more chargers, but we were told that there is a need for those spaces to have ADA compliance. Can you expand on this requirement? Do you want to take that one, Heather?
Sure. Yes. So ADA compliance is something that we work through in our projects. And so that does, my guess is that you will need to comply, or we would. It depends on this municipality. There are some different rules and regulations depending on where you live and the structure and kind of format of your parking, if it's behind a gate or not. But that said, I would expect that we probably will do some ADA compliance work throughout most of these sites. And so what that means is siting one or more of the EV charging stations adjacent to a van accessible disabled parking stall, and ensuring that there's a path of travel that meets ADA requirements, and ensuring that that path of travel does not go behind other vehicles. So really what that means is just being strategic about where we site the charging stations. And in some cases, it also means giving up a parking stall. So converting a additional parking stall so that we can create a van accessible ADA compliant stall. So I would say the challenge here can be needing to get some buy-in from property owners or managers to give up 1 or 2 parking stalls. And that's something to be aware of going into the project. But our installation contractors will map out the best locations for the charging stations based on proximity to electrical, ADA compliance, and kind of general available parking. So shared visitor parking, for example, tends to be really well aligned with this type of project. And they will make recommendations on where best to site the charging stations to reduce overall cost, both for the electrical and compliance reasons.
Great, thank you. So similar to that, still talking about installation, there's a question, does prevailing wage apply for EVmatch's contractors? So do you want to touch on that?
Sure. Yeah, this is funded through public funds. So yes, prevailing wage does apply, and our contractors will be paid prevailing wage based on the county prevailing wage rates for all of these projects. So yes, that is a requirement.
Great. All right, next question. Does the application need to be completed by the multifamily building owner, or could a partner organization complete the application? You want to answer that?
Did you want me to answer that?
Yeah, you want to answer that.
So I think a partner organization could submit it if the partner organization is the operator of the building. So I'm thinking an example would be like an affordable housing property or public housing that may be owned by a government agency and it's managed by an association or another entity. That might be an example where it would be acceptable for a different agency or organization to submit a application. It does need to be a decision maker who has the right to make capital improvement decisions on behalf of the property owner.
Great, thank you. All right, next question, is multifamily, the category of multifamily property, considered 2 units or more? And if the lot is shared with other buildings, is that still eligible? So I can answer this one. So yes, multifamily is 2 units or more. As Heather mentioned early on, we are prioritizing properties that are larger, but we encourage all multifamily, regardless of how few units you have, to apply. And if the lot is shared with other buildings, it is still eligible. It's actually somewhat preferred if there are other amenities nearby. So if there's retail, if it's a mixed use, anything like that, then it provides more accessibility for public access, and that is an aim or goal of this grant. All right, great. Looks like one more question I see. Someone's curious if there was a certain regionality to the location within California, perhaps in the large cities, for example, where there's a critical mass of drivers forming. So, are we prioritizing very specific areas in the counties? I can answer the first part. I'll pass it over to Heather. So again, the grants are available in Santa Clara County, Los Angeles County, and San Diego County. Obviously, within those counties, there are very dense urban areas, but we encourage properties in every or any part of those counties to apply. We are obviously interested in providing charging access to as many people as possible. So in some instances, having a property in a more dense area is preferred, but that doesn't disqualify other properties that may not be in as dense of areas. So certainly if your property qualifies in every other way and you're interested, please apply. Do you have anything to add to that, Heather?
No, I don't have anything else to add.
Okay, great. So those were all the questions that came in through the Ask Question portal. I don't believe there were any other questions from the chat. So we moved through it fairly quickly.
There was one other question I wanted to add to. So one question came in, what types of chargers are funded through this project? And we answered earlier that it's the NLX juice box, but I wanted to tell you a little bit more about that equipment. So this type of hardware, it's level 2 charging stations. So typically charges a vehicle, adds about 25 miles of range to a vehicle per hour. Really well designed for multifamily applications where people are spending multiple hours. The other aspect here is it's a Wi-Fi enabled charger, so it does need to connect to a Wi-Fi network, whether that network is the local network from the building or is from a cellular hotspot, which is something that we can install and provide for the property. So that's an option, but that connectivity then allows EVmatch to communicate with the charging station, collect data, meter the charging activity, and provide payment processing and access control features. And then I'll also mention that there are power sharing capabilities with the juice box. So in the event that there needs to be some power sharing in order to put multiple units on an existing electrical panel without updating the electrical or bringing in a new interconnection with the transformer, we can optimize the sharing, the power sharing, to ensure that we can kind of reduce those costs and reduce those delays with utility interconnections. So that's an important aspect of those charging stations. And they can be mounted on the wall. They can be mounted on a pedestal that would be installed in the parking lot. There's a lot of flexibility with the different configurations. And we've been working with the juice box for many years and have had great success at apartments and condos. So with that, we are happy to share more details as we get into the application process with sites, and we can provide details on the hardware specifications.
And it looks like we did have another question come in here. Will priority of the grants be given to properties in disadvantaged or BIPOC communities? Do you want to touch on that one, Heather?
Sure. So in terms of the funding allocation, it's not specifically allocated to disadvantaged communities, for example, per the Cal Enviro screen, or BIPOC communities explicitly. The criteria is that these grants are deployed in multifamily properties. That said, we are evaluating the submissions based on a number of criteria. We really are trying to optimize for communities that historically have not had access to charging infrastructure, and communities where we do think that there is a growing demand for charging infrastructure, and we will see utilization on the charging stations in the near future. So one area I want to speak to is that we are working to also focus on electrifying rideshare drivers. And we are working with some of the large transportation network companies to identify properties that have a large number of rideshare drivers and working to electrify those buildings specifically. So that could touch on that characteristic of underserved communities and disadvantaged communities.
Great, thank you. All right, so I believe that was the final question we received. Thank you everyone for attending. On this last slide, of course, get in touch with us if you have any questions, and please pull those links out of the chat if you either want to apply or you want to share the application with your property manager, your property owner, or just with your general network to share the information with them. And then there's also that second form that we linked in if you want to just talk to some EVmatch staff and learn more about this opportunity because you're not quite ready to fill out an application or you're not the right person to fill out the application. Feel free to fill that form out. We'll be in touch with you. And as Heather mentioned, I wanted to reiterate that the next funding round will be, or the next time that we review applications is October 15th. So we are receiving them on a rolling basis. We've received quite a few already, but we encourage you to apply as well so that we can evaluate all of them and apply as early as you can.
And then lastly, I wanted to highlight, if you want to read more about the grant program or share more about this opportunity with other folks via social media or email, you can go to the EVmatch blog, and we have a number of blog posts about this funding opportunity. So that's a good resource. If folks maybe don't have as much information as you do now, they really need to get some of the context on the grant. There's some great articles that you can share from our blog.
And it looks like it's been dropped in there. I'll drop it in one more time as well. Great. All right. Well, if we don't have any other questions, that concludes this webinar. Feel free to reach out to us, as I said, and we look forward to hearing from you in regard to the CC grant.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Bye.